Good afternoon, everyone. It's good to see so many people here today. And we're also welcoming those who are home on their couches, and they're probably really comfortable. And this is going to be a really nice afternoon. I have a few comments to make from Ian from our office. And I think you may know that I'm Kit Leighton, and I am on the Social Sciences Committee here at HASP. And our group has a wonderful time finding great speakers together. We have one here today. So we're happy that you're all with us in the classroom. And I need to ask you about your cell phones. It always happens, doesn't it? Make sure they are silenced, and then they won't distract from the presentation. So we're also thanking our course techs over in the back. Gloria Gordon is in the red shirt. And Steve Norden is one of our new individuals on social sciences, and he's going to be one of our techs for the hybrid modality today. If you have questions or comments and you want to ask them at appropriate times, would that be okay? Or would you like to, that would be okay? Raise a hand. Okay, very good. Okay, for Q&A. Okay. But if you have a question, will you please raise a hand, and either Gloria or I will make sure you have a mic so everybody can hear the question. Well, I'm very happy to present to you Kate Leighton-Colburn, and she is the executive director of Out on the Lakeshore, and they call it OOTL. And she's going to be sharing information today about the LGBTQ experience, programs and mission of OOTL, and what it means to be a supportive person, an ally of the LGBTQ community. She's going to be talking to you about various terms you may have questions about, definitions, how the language is evolving, history of the movement, and allyship work. And at the very end, you'll have a chance, all of you members here will have opportunity to examine resources that Kate has brought with her today. Kate is a Harlem native, and she is a Hope graduate, and her BA is in English Lit. She became executive director at OOTL in October of 22, and she brought with her 6 years of experience in management. This was in New York City, and she's also worked extensively in the performing arts. And I need to add here this little addendum. She shared with me that she is 3/4 of the way through her master's degree in social work. So that is really something to be proud of.
Working on it.
All right. So I am happy to introduce you to Kate Leighton-Colburn, our speaker today.
Thanks, Kit. Hi, everybody. Yep, I'm Kate. I recognize a few faces in the room. It's always fun to be back in your hometown. It's a little different from presenting in nonprofits and schools in New York City. So that's me. Kit gave you a pretty good rundown, but I'll talk a little bit about Out on the Lakeshore, OOTL, or as we affectionately call it, OOTL. Yeah, my wife asked me if, when I was in interviews, if I thought that they called it OOTL, and I was like, there's no way. And then in the final interview, everyone was calling it OOTL, and I was like, you're not going to believe this. So we provide expansive education, programming, partnerships, safe spaces, and brave spaces, and advocacy to LGBTQ+ individuals and their allies along the Lakeshore to create a more inclusive and welcoming community that is filled with pride. So when we say programming, we run year-round programming at the community center, just a few blocks away from here on Columbia. We provide support groups, peer groups, arts and recreation programming, events, and the annual Pride Festival, which happens every year in June.
In your class?
Mm-hmm.
So, yes, I am a Hope College alum. many moons ago, sort of. I haven't been back in Anderson Workman in this capacity in over 10 years, so that's fun. Is it still called Anderson Workman? I don't know. And I was in New York City for about 7 years working in youth development before this. So that's a little bit about me, a little bit about on the Lakeshore, and we'll jump right in. Okay, so today we're going to talk about some terms and definitions, some things you might know, other things you might not know. Some folks might know some things, other folks might not know things. That's totally okay. We're all coming to this room with different experiences and different understandings. And that's great. We love a diverse group of individuals. We'll talk some about working with and caring for LGBTQ plus young people. It's a very particular population with particular needs, what it means to be a good ally to the very best of our ability. And a little bit about some resources, and then we'll have time for questions and discussion. I'm going to try my best to define and explain what might be unfamiliar concepts, talk through some barriers and challenges that LGBTQ plus folks experience locally at the state level, national level, and just kind of on the daily in our personal lives. Okay, just some basic foundational stuff. Be curious. I love it when people are curious, when people have questions. Curiosity at its best is non-judgmental, which apparently I stole from Ted Lasso. I never actually had seen Ted Lasso, but I guess he's a smart guy. Yeah, it's important to ask questions. It's okay to ask questions. It's okay to not know. It's okay to not know the answer. And if I don't know the answer, which happens not infrequently, I am happy to find you the right answer and to point you in the right direction. This training class talk thing, whatever we want to call it, is intended as both a safe and a brave space. So you've heard of Vegas rules? Yeah, what happens here stays here. That's more or less what we're going for, but we take what we learn in this space and we share it out in the community, but we keep each other's confidences. We don't go around telling each other secrets and hardships and challenges on an individual level. Safe and brave. A lot of you have probably heard the term safe space, trying to update it to be safe and brave as well. So we can be both at the same time. We can challenge each other and challenge ourselves while also creating a warm and inclusive atmosphere where we can be comfortable to ask questions. Give it a brief second. There's a lot of words there if you want to read them. But that's the basic idea. Okay, so we're going to jump into terms and definitions. The first thing I want to say is, and I'll probably say this a few times, this is not exhaustive. There are so many words to learn, so many phrases to learn, and there's no way we can touch on them all in an hour or so. The other thing is, this language is frequently evolving, and that's true of all language, right? Language has evolved since the dawn of time and will continue to. And that's what's so cool about language. It's why one of the reasons I majored in English literature here, right at Hope College, and studied theater, because communication and the evolution of communication needs to be studied consistently. Otherwise, we lose track of ourselves and each other. And that's true of LGBTQ plus language, just like any other language. And then I want to just state that the overall theme of this is that there is power in knowing language, and there is power in naming. How many of you have read Madeleine L'Engle? Anybody? She wrote A Wrinkle in Time. That's her most famous book, but she has a whole there's a whole lexicon. And in her book, A Wind in the Door, she talks about what it means to name a person, what it means to give identity to a person based on who they are and who they say they are, That's what this is. We are providing like the language to better understand one another. And when you name a person with who they tell you to be, you give them respect and you give them their power back. For those of you who work from a biblical perspective, it's similar to the Psalms, you know, he who numbers them, number the stars one by one and calleth them all by their names. To know someone is to name them. Okay. So terms and definitions. We're going to talk a little bit about the basics of gender and sexuality. So sexual orientation / attraction. I'm going to give you a handout at the end of this with 5 different forms of attraction. Sexual attraction, although that's the one that we talk about most often, is not nearly the only form of attraction out there. We all experience different forms of attraction in different ways. Sexual attraction in particular is the desire for intimate sexual contact with someone. But there's also romantic attraction, the desire to connect with someone on a physical and emotional level. Now, sometimes those two go hand in hand, and sometimes they don't. You can have a romantic attraction to someone and not have a sexual attraction. You can have a sexual attraction to someone and not have a romantic attraction. You can be physically attracted to something and just want to feel their touch. That can be totally platonic. You can have an emotional attraction. And again, sometimes these things go hand in hand, but sometimes they don't. And it really depends on the person and their experience. And that's kind of the foundation of sexuality in general. And sexual identity is knowing that it comes in various forms. And then gender is separate from sexual attraction and physical attraction. They can in some ways go hand in hand, but again, they're not the same thing. So someone's sex assigned at birth is the sex, male or female. That's the way that the medical community defines it at this point, to which we are assigned when we pop out into the world. The doctor looks at you and says, this baby is a boy or this baby is a girl, and that is your sex assigned at birth. Now that is separate from your gender identity. And that's when we start talking about different forms of gender identity. But our gender identity at its core is our internal perception, so how we feel on the inside about our own gender, which might be the same as our sex assigned at birth. For some people it is, but it might not. Your sex assigned at birth can be different from your gender identity. And then your gender expression has to do with your gender identity, but is also separate in many ways. So for example, I personally identify as a cisgender woman, so I identify with my sex assigned at birth. My gender expression tends to be generally feminine, with our standard understanding of what femininity is, right? But I might identify as a woman, and my gender expression might be more masculine. They don't have to be one and the same. Femininity and womanhood are not the same thing. Someone can identify and express their womanhood in a more stereotypically masculine way, but still identify as a woman. And sometimes they might not identify with their sex assigned at birth. Someone who is assigned female at birth might identify as male and express that identity through masculine externalization. So their clothing, their hair, their makeup, whatever. Does that make sense? Anybody have questions? Cool. Okay, moving right along. I want to keep an eye on the time so that we can talk to each other. Okay. Again, not exhaustive, right at the bottom there. Okay, so some of the basics here. You've all probably heard the phrase LGBTQ+, right? So we'll go over just what that acronym stands for briefly, and then move on into more of the plus. So L stands for lesbian, a woman who is attracted to another woman. Gay, a man who is attracted to another man. However, gay is frequently used by many as a catch-all term. I sometimes use the term gay to describe myself, even though I am a woman who's married to another woman. Just because, I don't know, it happened that way. Again, language evolves, and people started using the term as a catch-all. And people can use some of this language interchangeably. Bisexual, someone who is attracted to either men or women. Generally speaking, the term falls within the binary, male or female. Transgender, someone whose sex assigned at birth does not align with their gender identity. And then the Q, queer or questioning. Most folks define the Q as queer at this point, but it can go both ways. Queer, as I'm sure many of you know, was used for a very long time as a slur. Very, very long time. I mean, it was still used as a slur when I was in school, when I was in high school, when I was in college, frequently. But the LGBTQ plus community started to reclaim it as far back as the 80s during the AIDS crisis. And that reclaiming has slowly progressed into present day. And now queer is used generally as a catch-all term, similar to the way I described gay, to describe anyone who falls within kind of the LGBTQ plus umbrella. It still is sometimes used as a slur. You might hear that occasionally, but it has also been reclaimed by the community. Huzzah. And then it can sometimes be used to mean questioning the Q. So someone who isn't sure about how they define their identity at this point, and they're figuring it out, which is a lot of us, kind of all the time. All right, so on the right-hand side are words that some folks might know and some folks might not. They're not as commonly used, but they're very real. Are there words in here that you don't know? Raise your hand if you don't know a word on the right-hand side. Yeah, okay. 2S, two-spirit. So I love having that one on the list because it just points to the fact that LGBTQ plus identity is expansive beyond Western culture. You know, I think we think within a Western paradigm here in the States frequently, but two-spirit is defined, well, it's a Native term, Native American, and it's defined as someone within the Native community who is not male or female in the typical sense of the word, but holds both masculine and feminine powers. It's basically a third gender, and has been part of multiple Native cultures for before we were here. So, and I'll mention this in another slide, but it just points to the fact that LGBTQ plus identity, although we use specific words for it now, has existed in various forms in various cultures throughout recorded history, and most likely before, obviously. Ancient Greece, ancient Mesopotamia, Native cultures. Yeah. Pansexual, yes, good question. Pansexual is defined as someone who's, well, basically it's defined as someone whose sexuality knows no bounds. It's derived from the Greek god Pan, god of wine and lots of other fun things. But it means someone whose sexuality is not defined by a binary in any capacity. So they can be sexually attracted to someone who is a cisgender male, someone who's cisgender female, someone who is transgender, someone who is intersex, someone who is gay, straight, in between. It's a very expansive identity. Demisexual is someone who does not experience sexual attraction until they have an emotional connection with someone. Non-binary is someone whose gender identity does not fall well within the gender binary, male or female. They fall somewhere within the spectrum. And then genderqueer is frequently used interchangeably with non-binary, honestly, but it also basically means someone whose identity does not fall within that binary. Let's see, what didn't I touch on? And then asexual is someone who does not experience sexual attraction. They might experience romantic attraction. They might experience physical attraction. They might not, but it means someone who experiences either a very low threshold or no sexual attraction at all. And then intersex, generally a more biological term, medical term, used when a person is born with reproductive organs or anatomy that doesn't fit into the box of male or female. Okay. And then, yeah, the important thing is to use the term. So we talked a little bit about like how sometimes queer can still be used as a slur and things like that. If someone is uncomfortable with the word queer, then just don't use it. You know what I mean? It's important to use the term that a person is most comfortable with. Yeah, so she asked what the difference is between intersex and transgender. Intersex, again, is more of a biological term. Someone can be born with genitalia that isn't what's typically understood as like male or female at birth. Historically, because we like a binary, medical professionals will assign a gender to an intersex person based on what they think they might identify as. But it's one of many reasons why we know that sex and gender are not within the binary. But it's when a person is born with sexual anatomy, physical reproductive organs that don't check the box of male or female. Whereas transgender, someone is assigned male or female at birth based off of anatomy that does check those boxes, right, of male or female. But their internal perception of their gender does not match our outward physical understanding by medical terms. Does that make sense? Okay, we'll keep talking. One is more physical and one is more emotional. Okay. This just gives you, so we went over this, but this just gives you a couple more details. So when I mentioned pansexual, it's also good to know that like pansexual identity tends to be pretty fluid, kind of free-flowing within the binaries. Gender identity and sexual identity can be fluid in general. Folks can experience a surprise attraction to someone they've never been attracted to before, but pansexuality tends to be defined as pretty fluid. And then, yeah, something I like to point out about asexuality, we talked about some of this already, but a piece of this is that each asexual person experiences attraction and relationships and arousal or what have you in their own way. And that's something to keep in mind about anyone's experience, of course, we're all different. But again, someone who is asexual might experience romantic attraction or physical attraction without that sexual attraction.
Excuse me, wait for the phone, wait for that.
Oh.
Here.
Transgender does not imply that there's been an operation to change your sex, does it?
Hey,
Or
Raka,
does
you literally started talking about what's on the slide. That's awesome. You're way ahead of me. That's great. Well done, sir. You're right. It does not mean that someone has medically transitioned. Someone who is transgender might have medically transitioned, but you don't have to identify as transgender. It's a good question. and you got it right. While we're talking about it, we can talk about other things that don't fall under the definition of transgender. Drag performance does not necessarily fall under the definition of transgender. Well, it doesn't, but someone who is a drag performer can be trans, but a drag performer is not inherently trans. Drag performance is a highly stylized performance art where someone dresses up, typically in the extreme presentation of a gender identity. So feminine or masculine. There are drag queens and drag kings. And people of any gender identity and sexual orientation can be a drag performer. And trans identity is not new, like I mentioned earlier. It can feel really new to us because within our culture and in the timeline in which we're living, we've typically understood gender identity to be a binary. And that's what we've been taught since we were tiny. But there's historical representation of gender diversity throughout history. Ancient Greece, ancient Egypt, ancient Mesopotamia. There's an 18th century Siberian third gender. Two-spirit is a form of third gender. So yeah, it can be easy to kind of fall into our own cultural understanding of gender identity and what we've been taught growing up. But once we look back and farther beyond Western culture, we see that this isn't new. They might have used different language to describe it, but it all has shown some level of diversity within gender expression and identity. And then cisgender, I feel like I should put this in an earlier slide because I think I've talked about it already, but cis or cisgender is defined as someone whose sex assigned at birth aligns with their gender identity. So the doctor says, you're a girl, and you think, yes, I am a girl.
What does the CIS actually mean? Is that an abbreviation or what?
That's a really good question. That I think, yeah, cis means same, and I don't know, what is it, Latin?
Since cis come from chemistry, just different ways to view molecules. So it's just borrowed from that as an alternative to trans.
Thank you. Yeah, I was going to say, I don't actually know the derivation of that, so.
Kate, I have a question as well. You use the word fluid or fluidity a
Mhm.
couple of times in your charts here. In your experience, in your research, your learning, are there case studies when someone identifies as asexual, but then moves to a different level, different state?
Mhm.
What do you know about that?
Yeah, people's identity and their attraction, really, their attraction more than anything else can change. That's true at any age. It's especially true with young people. It's part of healthy identity formation. That's true of young people in general, in like every possible way. We know that young people are figuring out who they are, and feel deeply in the moment that this is who they are right now. But you know, a few months from now, after some more identity exploration, feel differently, and that's okay. We meet them where they are in the moment. And it's true of adults to some degree too. Sexuality and physical attraction can be very fluid for everyone to some degree. It just kind of depends on the person. Yeah.
Would it be correct to say that you could be cisgender and either gay or straight?
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. So gender identity and sexual identity are different. And it's a combo platter. You can be one of a bunch of different things. So you can be cisgender, you can identify with your sex assigned at birth, but be gay and attracted to someone of your same sex who identifies as the same, who identifies with their sex assigned at birth. You can be transgender, so you can be a transgender woman, and be attracted to other women. So you can be a transgender lesbian. You can be gay and transgender. You mix and match. Any other questions? Yes. Linda.
So can you be, I mean, is there a term binary?
Mhm.
And then how is cis different than binary?
So if you're cisgender, you fall within the gender binary, generally speaking. So we've typically understood in our culture, gender as one or two things, or two things. You can be one of two things, male or female, right? So that's the binary, two. And if you are cisgender, you identify with one of those gender identities, and it's the one you were given when you were a baby. But yeah, cisgender just means that you identify with the sex you are assigned, and it is within the gender binary, because that's how the medical community still assigns. They're not interchangeable. So they're not like the same thing. You could sort of say they're the same thing in the sense that, like, if I am cisgender, I am of the binary. You know what I mean? But we don't really use it that way. Binary really refers more to the medical communities, not just the medical community, but cultural understanding, normative understanding of gender. Right. It's what is considered generally normative, even though we know now that it's not. And cisgender is more of like who you are, your identity.
So it's probably beyond the scope of this class because we were wanting to be allies. Is it one of the missions of OOTL? OOTL, how do you pronounce that? Whatever, it doesn't matter.
Oodle.
Is it one of the missions for people who want to be allies is to get a better grip on this particular issue, transgender? It seems to me in reading in the news and so forth that this is kind of the target area of
Yeah.
haters. And I'm thinking that it's probably beyond the scope of this class. I bet you could spend 2 hours helping us understand this a little better. But is that one of the missions of this organization out on the Lakeshore?
Yep.
To help people understand this better, because this transgender issue that's a focal point.
Yeah.
And I think for us to be allies, we need to be better educated on what this is, because there's so many bits and pieces to it, I think. So I'm just saying, is this a reason we want to become members of that organization?
Yeah, absolutely. Education and advocacy that's one of our main tenets out on the Lakeshore. And you're right, it's a flashpoint, politically right now, and culturally within our society, nation, Western culture in general, actually. So yeah, that's what we're trying to do. And there is a lot to learn. And we could probably spend many, many hours on it. So
Can I make
yeah.
a little plug here in terms of for allies, empathy point? Imagine for a person, if all the forms you fill out, if you have to check M or F and suddenly a trick question. I mean, for that crowd, that's what they go through every day, every
Yeah.
day. And for a long time, for all of us in the spectrum of this stuff, the married, single, widow, divorce question was a trick question because you'd been with somebody for 40 years, but the Supreme Court hadn't caught up. And so it's a trick question where you married or not, you want to know who's asking and why. But for the trans crowd, even male, female, or the non-binary, that's a trick question. So I didn't mean to interrupt, but just from the standpoint of empathy, because this crowd is here because they want to be empathic allies, just realizing that and realizing how well landmine even the most basic form is. I'll shut up now.
No, it's good. I'm gonna skip ahead and then go back just to touch on what you're saying. So what you're talking about to some degree is heterosexism, which is the value system that defines heterosexuality, and also being cisgender as normative. It's the only right. It's the only natural, normal, or moral mode of love or being, which also grants certain privileges to heterosexual people, and that's true of cisgender people as well. And our society is built around heterosexism and that understanding that the normal moral way to be is straight or cis, and that looks like medical forms, and it comes in all shapes and sizes. It means, you know, you can hold hands with your partner on the street, and not be worried that you'll experience harassment. It means you can give them a quick kiss goodbye, and not be worried that someone will say something. It means that you can fill out forms easily because they're catered to you.
We have one more question about terminology. Does transgender woman mean a woman transitioning to a man, or a man transitioning to a woman is the way it's phrased?
Yeah, no, that's a good question. A transgender woman is typically defined as someone who was assigned male at birth, but does not identify as male, identifies as a woman.
Whether or not the medical, the surgery has taken place.
Right.
Got it.
Yeah, you don't need to have medically transitioned to be able to use that label or claim that identity. Did we go over all? Yes, we did. Okay, I'm going to pass this out to you after we're done, but this is a typically used little layout here. It just kind of goes over what we've already talked about in picture form. The genderbread person, it used to, sometimes it's also called the gender unicorn and looks like a unicorn. That one's fun too. But it goes over the differences between gender identity, gender expression, biological sex, and sexual orientation, and the fact that all of these things are a spectrum and can be fluid. Pronouns, also a flashpoint, right? So where I like to start is that we all have pronouns, we all use them. You might hear folks being like, those pronoun people, or those people with pronouns. And it's like, well, technically you have them too. We use pronouns for everyone and everything. But now there's more of a focus on them. And I'm like, you learned about pronouns in English class, high school. So we can talk about it again. But what gets confusing for people, of course, what we're really talking about here is, again, that gender binary. So we've always understood pronouns to be one of two things. Someone is a he or someone is a she. And we say, he is speaking, please listen to him. Or we say, she is speaking, please listen to her. Where it can get confusing for people is if someone does not identify with their sex assigned at birth. So let's say they were assigned male, but they use she, her pronouns. And to you, they might still, did I say assigned male? Yes. They might still look masculine, or you might remember them as masculine or male, and it can be hard to switch in your brain. That's okay. That happens to all of us. Switching to new language, switching to new names, it takes a minute. And we do our best with what we have. And if we screw up, we say, oops, and we change it and we move on. Most of the time, you don't even need to say sorry, because sometimes that can put the onus back on the other person to like take care of you in the moment. And instead, you say, he's going to the library. I mean, she's going to the library, and you keep going and you use the correct pronoun. And people recognize that. They know you're trying, and that you change it in the moment. That's huge. Or if someone says, actually, my pronouns are she, you say, oh, thank you. And then you continue, that's good to know, and you continue using she. The they, them, theirs, so using the pronouns they for a singular person can get confusing for some folks. You know, I know we've typically been taught that they is a plural, is used for plural. However, what I do like to point out is that we frequently use they in the singular sense without realizing it. So my wife might say to me, hey, Derek gave me the number of a cat sitter for the weekend. I think that's going to work out. And I'll say, oh, what time are they going to come over? Because my wife hasn't told me who this person is. I don't know if, just based on the description she gave, I don't know if this person is male or female or what their name is. And that happens to us all the time. You know, we see someone lost their hat at the basketball game, and we see the hat on the ground and we think, oh, I need to get, like someone lost their hat. I need to get this back to them. I'll turn it into lost and found. And we do that all the time without thinking about it. So that's kind of where we need to retrain our brain, is when we see an individual person and we make a decision internally, what their pronouns are. That's when we need to switch and use they, them. If they tell you that their pronouns are they, them, we make that conscious effort to switch.
I think it also becomes confusing when you're reading and all of a sudden in the sentence, it was, you know, she was doing this, they, you know, or Jane was doing this, they are. That can be confusing too.
Yep, it can be. And also all of this was taught to us in school, also just in everyday life by speaking to one another. And it does require, for most people, a conscious effort to switch.
Well, I found it interesting when my granddaughter was getting some help with a move she was making, and she says a name, and then she talks about they, and I said, so was it more than one person helping you? Oh, no, you aren't with it, you know.
Yeah.
Well, as an English teacher myself, I have a terrible time giving a plural pronoun to a singular identity. So I can't call you or friends in this room a they. I can say Susie, John, Alice, Joe. But to say they just destroys my concept of how language works. And
Yeah.
I just have to say that, because the thing about the hat, I need to find whose hat this is. They lost their hat. No, someone lost a hat. So for me, and it's just probably my problem, but I spent my career teaching how to use these words.
Yeah.
So to sit here and then be told, oh no, it's okay. You know, the singular just became a plural. That's a real difficult one for me.
It's hard. It is hard, especially when that's been a big part of who we are, like, or who you are as an individual. And kind of going back to what I said earlier, it's going to sound funny the way I'm about to say it, but I'm going to go for it. We're kind of constantly destroying language, right? And rebuilding it. And that takes a lot of effort on the part of all of us. And we might never fully get there, and that's okay, but we just do the best we can.
At least we're not ending a sentence with a preposition or splitting an infinitive.
I do that all the time too, accidentally. I do that I write a lot of grants and I have to go back and remind myself. No dangling prepositions. Yes.
So is it, I'm trying to understand the they, them, theirs. So the person whose pronouns are those, they, them, theirs, would not use the pronouns she or he? I mean, is it Or are they interchangeable?
That's a really good question. And it depends on the person. Yes. So sometimes people will use the pronouns they, them, they'll use the pronoun they, and that's it. Frequently it's someone who identifies as non-binary or genderqueer and doesn't fall within the gender binary. Sometimes people will say my pronouns are she, they. So you can use either. Yeah, so it's a good question. Yeah, so Z's are Zers, pronounced two different ways sometimes, but Z is what's called a neopronoun or a new pronoun. Basically, they're used by folks who, in the place of she, he, or they, by folks who identify, generally speaking, as non-binary or genderqueer and feel like there is no word that describes, there is no pronoun that describes them well. Maybe they don't like they because they also feel like it feels plural to them. So there are new pronouns that folks will use that better defines them. I've come across this a couple of times, twice in my career working with young people, folks who used neopronouns. That's basically it. Yeah, and the real answer here is like, we use the pronouns that feel best for people. Because that's who they are, and that's how they choose to be named. Yeah. Question?
Wouldn't it be appropriate to ask the person, how do you want to be called?
Yeah, you can ask people their pronouns. Yeah, that's great. We do that a lot. That's actually really great practice in groups and also individually. Like we do that in meetings, we make it normative to just state your pronouns when you say your name, but if you're meeting with folks, a great thing to do is say, hi, my name is Kate, my pronouns are she, her, what are your pronouns? And it kind of like normalizes it for people. But it's really great to ask and also to share. It makes it more of a mutual experience. Okay. Moving on. Phobias. Y'all have probably heard the term homophobia or homophobic. It's describing a fear, but also not just a fear. It can also mean disgust or discomfort or general intolerance or hatred of homosexuality in general as a concept, or of someone who is gay, or basically just not straight. And it can mean this fear or disgust or discomfort of other people, but it can also be fear of yourself. Homophobia can be internalized. Internalized homophobia is what we call it. So it's disgust of any sort of gay or homosexual feeling that might occur within yourself. I did not turn off my notifications. Yikes, sorry. Okay. And then transphobia, similarly but different, describes that fear or disgust or hatred or intolerance of someone whose gender identity does not align with their sex assigned at birth. So someone who is gender diverse in some capacity. And again, that can be externalized or internalized. Which leads us to heterosexism, which we talked a little bit about earlier. That value system that assumes that heterosexuality or being cisgender is normative. And we can talk a little bit about what that does for folks. So we talked about fear of harassment in public if it's noticeable that you are not straight or you are not cisgender. So, you know, if my wife and I are walking down the street holding hands, we have to be a little bit more careful about where we do that, that kind of thing. But because heterosexuality is considered the norm, it's a lot of folks don't really have to worry about that for the most part, of course, like there are exceptions to every rule. It also means seeing positive role models and just models in general in the media. Now this is starting to change, which is great. We love that. There's more diversity in film and television and literature and all art forms, really. Although it has been a little bit more present in the theater ongoing. But we're starting to see some representation of diverse sexual identities and diverse gender identities in film and television in ways that are more normative, you know. Even the media representation we had for decades was a little bit tragic. There was the kill your gays trope. Gay characters were frequently maligned or challenged, or they were stories about the pain and heartbreak experienced by gay folks, which is great to some degree. We need to see that. But now we're starting to slowly see everyday people be gay in the media. And their stories aren't just about their sexuality. And that's what we're hoping to see more of. Because generally speaking, due to heterosexism, we only really saw that with straight characters. And cisgender characters. And then there's no fear of being rejected. Generally, again, there's fear of being rejected for other reasons, but most folks aren't afraid of being rejected by their families for being straight. Okay, I've got like 10 minutes. So I'll talk a little bit about LGBTQ plus young people, youth and young adults. It's a particular population. That's my background as of the last 10 years, working with youth, particularly queer youth. So LGBTQ plus young people are more likely to experience what we call ACEs, or adverse childhood experiences. Some of you have probably heard of this, some of you maybe not. ACEs, it's a whole host of, well, hard things that can happen when you're a young person, primarily in the home. So abuse and neglect, physical, emotional abuse or neglect in the home, a parent or caregiver who is incarcerated, a parent or caregiver who experiences addiction, things like that. And they're more likely to experience these ACEs than their straight or cisgender peers. 45% of queer young people report active suicidal ideation, meaning there's a difference between active and passive suicidal ideation. Active ideation means that there's a plan in place. They have an idea of how to do it. They might do it, kind of thing. And then 1 in 5 transgender youth attempt suicide. I should have probably given a warning about this. This is very depressing stuff. So we're going to talk a little bit about protective factors as well, and that will, you know, mitigate some of these challenges. So LGBTQ plus young people are at increased risk of what we call polyvictimization. So they experience victimization in multiple different capacities at once. They experience these challenges at multiple different capacities at once. So they're at increased risk of, at one time, risky sexual behavior, illicit drug use, prescription misuse, and then multi-system involvement. So they could be involved in, at the same time, the healthcare system and the homelessness system and the juvenile justice system and the foster care system within that combo platter. 80% plus 80% and then some of trans and non-binary youth fear for their right to access affirming medical care, access to bathrooms that align with their gender identity or bathrooms that are individual stalls, that kind of thing. And for their right to access extracurricular activities, to join the clubs that they want to join the teams that they want to join after school. And then another important note is that there are multiple intersections of identity at play here. So LGBTQ plus youth of color, Black and brown young people are at a higher risk of experiencing these challenges, mental health challenges, but also all of these challenges, multi-system involvement, primarily because of the intersection of their identities. They experience prejudice, discrimination, harassment for multiple reasons at the same time. For being gay, for being trans, for being Black. And then Ottawa County. So this comes from the, yes.
Yeah, I'm particularly sensitive to your comment about 45% of the LGBTQ plus youth attempting suicide or having a suicidal ideation.
Mm-hmm.
What in who, I'll just localize it. What's being done to make folks aware of thoughts of suicide, but also skills in
Mhm.
keeping somebody with suicide ideation safe?
Yeah, so there are multiple things happening. So there are multiple organizations in the area, like if you've heard of Arbor Circle, that provide question, persuade, refer trainings to community members and organizations through trainings as well, which helps folks identify risk behaviors and how to support a person, ask the right questions, get them to the right place if they're experiencing suicidal ideation. So there's that. There's the trainings that we provide in the area. We provide LGBTQ plus youth specific training. Mostly we've given them to organizations and medical practices to help them identify those risk behaviors as well. And then we also have an ongoing cultivated resource list of mental health professionals who are affirming to the LGBTQ plus community. So getting folks, and we provide those referrals, getting folks where they need to be for the next step.
My daughter is a high school social worker here at Ottawa County. The majority of our caseload are LGBTQ youth who are suicidal.
Yeah.
She also says if they've had this surgical operation, if they identify as male, they're less suicidal.
Yeah. So I don't have those statistics on me. I do have them. But there are statistics to point to that.
It seems to me that this LGBTQ amongst youth is probably, I don't know, I'm thinking it's a new phenomenon that we haven't we just ever talked about it in the past? It just seems like it's so much more prevalent.
Yeah, it's kind of both. So it's new in the sense that like we haven't really been talking about it. And therefore it is new in some ways. And we also have new language to describe it. You know what I mean? So that is new. But LGBTQ plus identity isn't new really. It's just become more normative and folks feel more comfortable openly exploring their identity in a way that they hadn't before. Sometimes that's literally just gender expression. Like folks are starting to feel more comfortable. Maybe like I know of cisgender men who are feeling more comfortable dressing in a feminine way, even though they still identify as male. So there are all of these new things happening that aren't new in the sense that like people have felt these things for a long time, but now we're able to externalize it, right?
Yeah. So I wonder if the overlap between, I spent my career in juvenile justice, juvenile court, and when you look at that ACE thing you're talking about earlier, I mean, that has always been, I mean, that's only been the last 20 so years that I've been aware of that. But,
yeah,
in my career, adolescence is a really difficult time, just period. And then you add the social media that's going on the last 20 so years. Yeah. And, in talking with a friend recently, went to visit some friends and talking to their child who was a teenager, there's pressure from all different sides. I mean, this person, they reported that there is a lot of pressure to identify you know, and that stresses this person out a lot. Is it, I got to identify, you know, I'm only 14 years old. Why do I have to identify as LGBTQ or C or straight or whatever? Why do I have to, why can't I just be a kid? So my point is I hope we need a lot of effort made on the mental health surrounding all young people. And I'm so thrilled that you're doing what you're doing, but I don't want to lose focus of the fact that there is 100% of the young people out there who have needs that need to be attended to by our community and rather than shunned aside. So.
You know, absolutely. And I want to highlight something you said, which is that, you know, I think young people in general, it is developmentally appropriate for young people to seek a label. However, those labels don't actually define them, right? They want to feel like they are a part of something. They want to feel like they know themselves. And so label seeking, it is developmentally appropriate, but it's not definitive. And yeah, I mean, I defined myself in a lot of ways when I was 14, that I don't anymore, thankfully. So that we meet young people where they are, but we don't necessarily leave them there, right? We work with them along their journey, and that's true of all young people, whether they are LGBTQ+ or not. And some young people really know that about themselves really early, like that they are attracted to someone of the same sex, and some people don't. And that journey is different for each individual, and that's totally okay. And that's something we need to be continually reminding young people, because, oh God, I'm going to sound so old, because things like TikTok are telling them otherwise. So we just need to remind people that, like, it's okay to be who you are. And it's also okay if that changes. So, yeah. Ottawa County youth and numbers. So this comes from the youth assessment survey given out by the county. This is from the 2021 survey, which does provide some survey questions for LGB youth. They do not survey or have not historically surveyed gender diverse youth, which is a conversation that is ongoing. But yeah, these are some of the numbers for us in particular. This survey is given to local school systems, which can opt in to take the survey. So Holland Public, West Ottawa, Black River, and the like. Yeah, so 21 versus 5% report suicidal ideation or attempting suicide, actually, which is slightly different. And then bullying and use of substances.
One thing I noticed about the chart up here is that the substance used, it doesn't have the straight average up there. And I suspect if you took a survey in this room, that close to 100% would say, yes, I've used substances at one time or another in this room. So I'm but just interested to have that piece of data on.
I do have the number somewhere and I'll get it to you. It is higher than straight young people, not as significantly higher as like bullying or suicidal ideation. And this includes, I believe alcohol, marijuana, and also illicit substances. Yeah, but that's a good question. I can get you that number. Yes.
Oh, thanks. That 21% is versus 5%. What are the issues that the 21% are facing? Is it confusion over who they are, not wanting to admit who they, wishing they weren't, or what leads to that high number?
That's some of it, you know, wishing they weren't, and that, but it goes deeper than that. So it's wishing they weren't, but it's wishing they weren't because of external forces telling them that they shouldn't be. So primarily it's because they're experiencing bullying or harassment due to their identity. And that might be in school, but it might not. It might be at home. It might be in their faith community. It might be in public, depending on how they present. So that tends to be what it is. It's just a lack of, it's their environment, lack of social supports. Which brings us to protective factors. So yes, we're talking about all of these risks and challenges, but there are a lot of things that we can do to support young people so that they're not experiencing these things to the same degree that they might be. We can mitigate that risk to some degree. Some of that is just, some of that doesn't have to do with what we can necessarily change. Some of that is inherent to their surroundings. So young people who are in homes of a higher socioeconomic status are less likely to experience these things. So folks with lower incomes tend to have more challenges. Educational status, young people in the home of with caregivers who have advanced degrees tend to do a little better. Obviously, housing status, folks who have shelter. And then race, which we talked about a little bit earlier. And most of that is polyvictimization. That's because folks are experiencing harassment due to their race as well as their sexuality. And then social supports, which are things that we can work on. And I like to think that systemically we can work on these socioeconomic issues as well. But on an individual day-to-day basis, we can provide young people with caring adults. Even one caring adult greatly reduces the risk of suicide in LGBTQ plus young people, and honestly, any young person. Then the environment in which they are living. So that can be home, but also especially school, because that's where they spend most of their time. So providing trainings to staff and addressing bullying when it happens. And then faith communities can be so powerful for young people, but they can be powerful in different ways. They can be powerfully harmful, and they can be powerfully helpful. So, yep. Okay, here first.
Okay, to follow up on that, on your comment just now, is the gayness is a choice thing still prevalent?
It's still a thing, I will say, not as prevalent. I know of a lot of, now it's more of like it's not a choice, but you should be celibate. That tends to be more of a thing now. But the choice thing does still exist, and conversion therapy does still exist. And not every state has banned it yet, even though it has been disproved by the American Psychological Association.
This should be a quick answer. Is out on the Lakeshore working with religious groups and or school groups or schools? Are you actually involved with different churches or other kind of religious affiliated groups and church organization, or excuse me, school organizations?
Yes. So, I mean, depending on whether or not they want to be, but yes, we are. We have multiple church affiliates. We were actually founded by some churches that they were part of our foundation. And then we also frequently get asked by faith institutions to come in and speak. Maybe if their church is going through a discernment process, or if they just want to talk about it. Yeah.
I'm curious with the statistics that you gave for Ottawa County of 21% compared to 5%. Now, given the religious affiliation and involvement that we're talking about, if you were in Detroit, Chicago, would those statistics be approximately the same, or are those statistics higher here because we all know we've got pretty strong religious affiliation?
That's a great question. We actually kind of trend on average with national statistics. Yeah. So I wondered that as well before I started doing the research, because you'd think, but we trend pretty much on average. And granted, the national statistics are an aggregate, so like that includes areas that are more conservative. So it's kind of hard to say, but I have never looked at like the difference between us and Chicago though, so I could like do that comparison. Yep, right here.
In the meantime, we have a question from online. With current examples of state governments effectively prohibiting gender affirming care, how do organizations like yours prepare and protect your community? What do you think will be the outcome if or when these bans are challenged legally?
Oh, Okay, a couple questions in there. First and foremost, we provide supportive spaces. So we have a group called Gender Safe, which is a support space for gender diverse individuals. It's not a therapy group, but it is very therapeutic in nature. It's run by a couple of volunteers, as well as, generally speaking, a licensed practitioner. And just having that peer support can be really helpful. We also provide referrals to affirming medical care, and if they can't access it where they are, we work to get them there. We try to find transportation or provide money for Ubers, things like that. And then when it comes to legislation, we are an advocacy organization. We do advocate for what we believe to be appropriate policy and healthy policy. When they're challenged, what will the outcome be? I think it depends on the state, you know. If when they're challenged in Florida, the challenge won't win. That's what I think the outcome will be. But when they're challenged, you know, in places that tend to be more purple, it could go the other way.
I think the questioner was from the state of Ohio.
Oh,
I spent
hello,
the
Ohio.
last
I'm
38
thinking of Ohio when I
Yeah.
said purple.
I spent the last 38 years as a pastor in Ohio,
Mhm.
just relocated a couple years ago. I assure you that when it is challenged in Ohio, the governor's veto will be overridden. That's just the climate in that state right now.
Yeah.
Hello?
And the other thing to note too is that like that climate, especially in certain places that tend to be more fluid in their political identity, can change like pretty much year to year.
I think another issue that my daughters have found with junior high students and seems to be public is they bring up the sexual identity like in their sexual courses. And some of the teachers have said, you know, you could explore. They're only in junior high. And we find that young people, maybe under 20, have no problem with the switching, changing. And as we get over 20 in the Gen X, they kind of question it. And we over 50 cannot understand it at all.
Yeah, I think, you know, you're speaking to the generational divide, which is true for a lot of things, not just sexuality. And that's something that we're actually doing a panel on the generational divide in June. You should all come. It's part of our speaker series for Pride Month. And we're going to speak to that. And that's true not just in the straight community. That's not just true of straight folks. Like there is a generational divide for within the LGBTQ plus community too, because that just tends to be inherently true.
Are you offering any kind of support to gay couples that wish to adopt?
Oh, that's a great question. I just got that question the other day for the first time. We do have some referrals that we can provide. We don't provide in-house though. So we provide referrals to places that we know to be affirming. Sort of. There are places that will work with LGBTQ plus couples. It's just important to know that each couple's experience might be different based on who the individual they're working with at the company. Yeah. And that some of these places, while they will work with LGBTQ plus couples, they don't provide sensitivity training. They don't, that's not like part of who they are inherently as an organization. You know what I mean? Like legally, they work with LGBTQ plus couples. And then talking a little bit about what we can do. So we talked a little bit about this. It's creating and enforcing policies within your organizations. And that can be like, for anything you do, like even if you're part of a club post-retirement, like it's making sure that you're, or an organization, or you're on a board of another organization. It's creating policies that are inclusive, membership policies in particular, client policies. So making sure you have forms that have multiple identities listed, and making sure you have non-discrimination policies in place. Oh, sorry. It's normal, I swear. I'm just 7 months along. That's all. Thank you. It's constantly questioning our own biases and challenging our preconceived notions. It's giving space for underrepresented voices to be heard. So if you notice that someone hasn't had the opportunity to speak in a room, in a planning meeting or whatever, saying, hey, what do you think? It's opening the floor. And it's having these conversations that we're having right now. It's asking questions. It's talking to each other in a respectful way. It's knowing that we can challenge each other and also challenge ourselves. We can be challenged. And then, yeah, we've talked about this already, but using the names they give you. It's the power of naming. Creating a culture of inclusion, it can also mean what you said earlier, which is asking someone's pronouns or giving your pronouns first and then asking for them. That is a very simple way to create a culture of inclusion. Oh, this language is from an earlier training, but it'll make everyone more comfortable. And then these are just kind of some quick takeaways that I like to lay out. Be as supportive as you can, before class, someone was talking to me about telling their grandchild that they were proud of them. And that is huge. Language like that is so important. Try not to be shocked. We might be shocked internally, but try not to express that super externally. It's totally okay if you are surprised. But when responding to what they're telling you, we try our best to be not overly shocked and to instead say, oh, thank you for letting me know. And you can say, tell me more about what that means for you. Normalizing identities, being adaptable to identity exploration, which we talked about. Doing your own research is great. Not putting the onus on the other person to tell you to be the guru of all things queer. Taking accountability. No one's perfect. I screw up all the time. I use the wrong pronouns. I assume things about people just by looking at them, because that's what we do as people. That's the way our brains work. But we just own it and we move on. And then be as genuine as you can. Folks can tell when you're faking it. That's especially true with kids, I've found. They can really tell when you're faking it. And then challenge remarks that are unhealthy or unkind, or stereotypes. We're the best advocates for each other. And that's a form of education as well. And you can always ask. You can always ask if you don't know. And again, they don't have to be the guru of all things queer. We're not the example for the entire community. And there's some resources here at the local, state, and national level. Some of these you might know. You've probably seen at least the symbol for the Human Rights Campaign. It's the little blue square with the yellow equals sign. Largest national LGBTQ plus rights in the organization. They have so many resources on their website. For young people in particular, the Trevor Project can be really helpful. They provide mental health resources and intervention for young people experiencing mental health crisis. Us, we exist. MDHHS provides information on best practices for working with and caring for folks. There are multiple crisis hotlines. The Trans Lifeline is one in particular for the gender diverse community, but there are multiple hotlines out there in general for mental health crisis. And then PFLAG, we were founded by PFLAG actually, and a couple of other places, but Parents and Friends of Lesbians and Gays, and they've been around for a long time. We had a chapter in our community that still exists to a degree, but they also have a lot of really good resources online as well, and that's for parents who are allies of their kids.
I just wanted to take a step back to your previous slide and state the obvious. Think about all these things when it's time to vote.
Yeah. I can't tell you how to vote because we're a 501c3 nonprofit, but make sure you take a look at what your representatives believe and what they're voting for. You know what I mean? No matter the party, honestly. Yes.
Yeah, I'm just going to speak for myself, but I think for me, that one of the most difficult things to realize was I can be an ally without having it all figured out.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, I'm the kind of person that wants to know and research, and I'm not going to know everything.
Yep.
I can't figure it all out, but I can still be an ally.
Absolutely. And we're likely never going to have it all figured out because that's kind of impossible, just generally speaking, whether it's about LGBTQ plus identity or anything related to interpersonal relationships.
Do you have any statistics on the percentage of LGBTQ people who identify as intersex?
Do I have any statistics?
Yeah.
You said? I do, not on hand, but I can send them to you. What kind of statistics are you looking for? Like what percent of the population
Yes.
or, okay.
Yes.
Yeah. I'm gonna write that down. I believe it's somewhere around 2% of the population is intersex, around 2%, but I'll need to double check on that for you.
Yeah, this is really more on a negative side. But there have been people that have mentioned to me different articles about how the schools have been trying to encourage kids and to go trans and without discussing this with their parents, and all kinds of negative issues regarding the educational system. And I just like to be able to rebut that based on more real information.
Yeah, thank you for that. So, I can't speak for every individual who works in every school system. I can't speak to what every single individual is saying to a young person, but I can tell you that based on my experience, no one is telling a young person to be trans, or that they should be transgender, or that they should transition to being transgender. Instead, what they're saying, what they're doing is meeting a young person where they are. And at their best, kind of what I said earlier, it's meeting a young person where they are and allowing them to be that person in that moment, and then traveling with them on the rest of their journey. But it's not telling them who to be. And it's not telling them that, okay, you're telling me that you're transgender. That means you should do this and this and this and this and this. It's not defining them. It's not defining it for them. Instead, it's asking the right questions and learning who they perceive themselves to be. That is my experience of the folks that I've worked with, who are social workers at the school, many teachers, administrators, things like that. And that's best practice too. We used a donor. We used a donor. Yeah.
This isn't really a question, but it's a comment. Good friend of mine has a granddaughter who's autistic. And she found the greatest acceptance in high school was in the LGBT community. She wasn't accepted by her other peers at all. And that was her sanity, if you will. That was what kept her going to school.
Yeah, I think, at our best, and that is not to say that the LGBTQ plus community is not without its own issues and challenges, but I think, at our best, it tends to be a very open and affirming community because of the challenges that they've faced due to their own identity. So, and, we could spend a whole nother hour talking about all of that and also the challenges and the everything.
Thank you. I have one question. This is a personal wrestle that I have personally. I come from a pretty strong faith background, and I would say that my view of sexuality is defined on what I believe Scripture says. Now,
Sure.
I could be wrong, but that's my own personal belief. So my struggle would be, I believe that every person, gay or straight, is imago Dei, is made in the image of
Made in the
God,
image of
to be
God, yep.
respected for that. My struggle is, where is the tipping point between acceptance and welcome versus advocacy and promotion of an agenda? And even the word agenda has
It's loaded.
heat in it. Yeah. That's where I personally struggle.
Yeah, I think everyone can serve a different purpose in this work. Not everyone needs to be standing on a soapbox and being the advocate at the state level. It's great to do that. But it's also great just to be a space where someone can come in and know that they are accepted and welcomed for who they are. That they won't be shut out for who they are, that they're welcome at the table. And I think, we'd have to go a little bit deeper and define what those words mean, like welcome and acceptance and things like that. Because for some people, they define it differently. So we need to talk a little bit about more about that as well.
About a year ago, there was a one-night performance here at the Holland Armory. And it was put on by the Holland Chorale,
Yeah, I
conducted
saw that.
by Patrick.
It was
Boyle.
beautiful.
If it was called Considering Matthew Shepard. It was the most wonderful show I have seen. Please do whatever you can to talk to Patrick to bring it back. I recently talked to him and he said, I wouldn't put a no on it. Did you see it?
I did. I was there. I was tabling.
It was
Like
fabulous.
It was beautiful.
So if anybody hears about the show Considering Matthew Shepard, make sure to attend.
Yeah, if you were there and turned around, you'd have seen me crying. It was
My
beautiful.
husband Stan and I are in the Holland Chorale, and it was the most difficult, but the most just uplifting piece that we have ever done. And there were people standing all over the place because we just couldn't find a spot.
Yeah, you had a huge
large
crowd.
enough. We did. It is performed every once in a while. I know that Fountain Street Church did it maybe a few months ago. I can't remember when. I don't know if you can just Google that or not. I'm not really sure. But thank you for that. I would also, before we thank Kate for her wonderful presence today, I would like to thank each of you for being here, because the fact that you signed up for this course means that you are already an ally. That's how I feel. And I appreciate all of the questions, Kate. I think you do too.
I definitely do. I appreciate every single question and comment today, honestly. That's what it means to be in a brave space, in a curious space. So thank you for that. I really appreciate
And
it.
we're learning. We're trying to learn.
Yep.
And you're
And
helping
I'm
us.
right there with you.
Yes,
So.
thank you, Kate, very much. And we hope sometime to have you back again. We don't know when, but we can talk.
Yeah,
As
sure.
you said, we can talk. And thank you so much. Will you join me in welcoming Kate Leighton-Colburn today?
Ooh.
Yes, extras right here. Thank you. Thank you. She's pretty great, wasn't she?